Hello, you are watching Procurement and Supply Chain Live. Now, our next event is a group discussion, the subject of which is something that's close to all our heart these days, the future of work, a hybrid workforce. Now, taking part will be Farine Mirzai, who is Senior Director, Analyst Procurement at Gartner. Farine is an operations leader who develops and executes integrated programs to help organizations expand. And our next speaker is John Bacon Jr., who is Vice President of Supply Chain at Mesa Airlines in the US. John came to Mesa after 27 years with the US Marines, where he specialized in aviation logistics support for the US Navy. And our final speaker today is Rajiv Karmacharya, who is Head of Strategic Sourcing at Fannie Mae, a leading source of mortgage financing in the US, where he has been for 9 years. So welcome, Farine, welcome, John, and welcome, Rajiv. It's great to have you on board today. I hope everyone's well. And so today's topic, you know, it's a big one, isn't it? We've all, virtually anyone who's been in work for the last couple of years has gone through this, is going through this. You know, they're making that transition now from remote working to hybrid working. You know, some companies are moving at a faster pace than others on that front. You know, it's making different demands of employers, and it's also making different demands of employees. I'd like to ask you, Farine, as an opener, you know, what do you think the skills of the future will be? What is this new sort of hybrid model sort of bringing to bear in terms of what skills people need in order to thrive in this modern day workplace?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sean. That's definitely changing. I think, you know, two things really come to mind for me, and the Gartner data shows that really digital dexterity is something that is kind of really right at the top of that list. And when we talk about digital dexterity, you know, what does that really mean? Digital dexterity is an employee's not only their ability to interact with data and with technology, but a willingness to interact with data and technology. And those are really kind of two key components to an employee's ability, you know, to get the jobs of the future done. Really, the second piece also is business acumen, right? With technology in the procurement space, taking over more and more of kind of those redundant, sometimes non-value-added tasks. Procurement associates and a procurement leader's ability to really interact with the business and have a keen sense of business acumen are also a skill that's going to be highly needed in the future.
That's absolutely true. I mean, and a big part of, you know, these new demands on employees will be training as well, won't it? And, you know, I mean, has anybody got any sort of strong views on what the training programs of the future need to look like as well, in order for these skills to be embedded?
You know, Sean, I think I'll probably echo what Farine said about the, you know, the components of, you know, the dexterity or the skills that you need, right? There's a component of, I think, the mindset piece, right? So, and that, to me, that's really around problem solving and figuring out business problems, and, you know, figuring out, you know, ways to address those in a new model, right? So it's not just about just employing a technology. It really is about rethinking how you're using the technology to enable the work that you're doing. So I think from a training and professional development perspective, it's, you know, it's got to focus on getting our teams to be much more, you know, focused on the problem solving analytical aspects of things, to help them with that. And there's, you know, some software skills as well that you need, but I think combination of those two would be what I would see as the, you know, probably an approach that would work.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, one thing I've been hearing, you know, a lot about, you know, with regard to the situation we have now with hybrid working and the move from remote, is, you know, human-centric workforces. But Rajiv, I wondered if I could ask you, you know, what does that actually mean in real terms on the ground? You know, particularly in a hybrid work model.
Yeah, Sean, thanks for the question. And I think it's super relevant now, right? As we're talking about, and you hear things about the Great Resignation and the challenges we're all facing in our companies, with regards to sort of employee retention. And I think the way we're thinking about human-centric workforce is really focusing on our employees and their well-being. So we still have obviously technology continues to play a role, but I think it's more as an enabler to help employees to do their best work from wherever they feel that they can be most productive, right? And I think if you really think about sort of the dimensions to this, the first one that comes to mind is flexibility. Really giving our employees flexibility to balance their work, their home life in a way that suits them, so that they can be productive at their time. And the second dimension really is trust, giving sort of our team members more ownership and ownership over their not just the deliverables but also their daily routine. Really demonstrate that we trust them, and I think that's really important to develop their confidence and being able to deliver in this sort of challenged hybrid model that we're starting to see. And there are a couple other things I'll quickly touch on. One is the recognition.
Yeah,
I think the recognition is also important. And then lastly is really focusing on employee wellness, making sure that they're not getting burnt out. Because again, I see this as when we were all in the office, the challenges were somewhat different from when we were all working remotely. Now in a hybrid model, trying to coordinate schedules, trying to coordinate, with our team, with our stakeholders, with our suppliers, I think it poses a different set of challenges. So I think we got to be on top as leaders, on top of our employee wellness to make sure they're not getting stretched too thin or they're not getting burnt out.
Do you think wellness? I beg your pardon, John. After you.
Actually, I just wanted to just caveat a little bit of what you just touched on, Rajiv, and also go back to the training piece when you mentioned flexibility. Being flexible with the hybrid work environment also applies to our training because at some point, every company is going to have to update software, adopt new procedures, et cetera. And sometimes training the workforce on that new software, on those new procedures in a remote environment, that presents unique challenges. So, and there's nothing that can beat, especially in the hybrid model, on those days where people are back in the office, gathering in a conference room, closing the door, and everybody getting on the same sheet of music with whatever that new procedure is. So those are the things when it comes to the hybrid where you have the good of working remotely and the other good of coming into the office for short periods of time just to do some things, have that face-to-face interaction that the working from home just doesn't help you accomplish.
And that's a very good point, John. And going back to something you mentioned, Rajiv, you were talking about the importance of wellness and welfare. I wondered, Farine, what you think about this in terms of is wellness and welfare more of an issue now in a hybrid workplace than it was, pre-pandemic when everybody was office-based?
Yeah, it's definitely, I don't know if it's more important, but it's definitely more front and center. And so, I think the pandemic really, and everything that we as humans experienced during the pandemic, it has caused employees to recognize that work is a subset of life and not separate from life. And, we fundamentally shifted how we think about work. And Gartner's coined the phrase about a year ago, the human deal. And so that really is what employers are faced with. They're faced with a human deal now, is how do we create an offering in our workplaces that it's not just about what an employee gets from work, it's about how they feel when they're at work, right? And so, offering mental health resources and offering the entire subset of what, of a positive environment where workers can bring their whole selves to work and not just a subset of who they really are to work is really what employers are faced with today. And it is more today about how employees feel while at work, not necessarily what the employers are providing to them in terms of base or comp or benefits and that type of thing. So it's a fundamental shift in how employees are having to bring themselves to work. The one other thing is, we talk about empathy and leaders, right? And that really is front and center now. And if our leaders are not leading with an empathy first mindset, they're behind the 8 ball, really, because that's what employees need these days.
Sure. And
yeah. Sorry, Sean. Go ahead.
No, Rajiv, you go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just, Fareen, you prompted something as you were talking about, the empathy aspect of this. And I think, one of the things that I've seen is that as leaders, we have to role model some of the behaviors to minimize, the impact, right? So for example, I think of, getting emails at the middle of the night is not a pleasant experience, right? So, and you feel like you have to respond, especially if it comes from your boss. So if you can model that to say, you know what, I'm not going to send emails at midnight to my team. I can wait till 8 a.m. in the morning, right? Small things like that goes a long way, I think, to alleviate, people's stress levels. Because I mean, all of us have phones; they're all checking emails, and it's just, it's just one other thing for people to have to worry about. So that's one. The other one, I think, going along the sort of being authentic sort of theme. One thing that I always appreciate is, especially from, leaders in our firm, as I notice, is they're pretty open about, things that are happening in their house. So if someone comes in the door, like their son comes in, it's fine. It's not a big deal, right? So they've really normalized the human aspect of things that happens to us on a daily basis. And I think that has really helped. And I think it's important to do that.
Rajiv, on that example of leadership by example, I will highlight something I did. Normally when I'm traveling, or if I take a few days off of work of personal time off, I tell my leadership team, please don't hesitate to contact me if absolutely necessary, because they know I'm very engaged and I like to stay informed. However, I do let them know when I'm in times, like, for example, when I traveled out of the country for my birthday with my fiance last year, I said, guys, this is the one time where I'm letting you know, unless the company's on fire, don't call me.
Yeah.
But I wanted to show them that it's okay to unplug for short periods of time and communicate that you're not available for personal reasons, because we all need that time off. We all need that mental break sometimes. So great point, sending emails at 1 a.m. just to show that you're up. Even if you are up, the email can wait till 8 a.m. in the morning when normal working hours.
That's absolutely true. And everybody has to adjust their behavior, I guess, in lots of different ways to fit into these new ways of working. I was wondering, actually, maybe I'll put this to you, John. How can employees stand out in a hybrid work environment? When the skills are different, and you're for at least 2/3 or 3/5 of the week you're not actually physically in the office. How can you progress your career in the same way you might have done if you were completely based in the office?
Thanks for that question, Sean. And I think it just boils down to doing everything you can to maintain some personal connection and engagement. Whereas a lot of as we used to call, water cooler talk that would happen in the office, excuse me, doesn't necessarily happen when you're working remotely. However, just do simple things like stay engaged. For example, when you're on a online conference call such as this, turn your camera on. When I engage in some forums and I listen on some professional networks, I'm surprised at the number of people that make it a point to keep their camera off as much as possible. Now, we all have times where there's things going in the background at home, the house is a mess, whatever, and you don't want the camera on, fine. But the majority of the time, just show your boss that you're actually engaged in the conversation, that you're not responding to emails while in the meeting. Those simple things actually make a huge difference.
Perhaps you do. I always assume that if somebody's camera's off, that they're in their dressing gown. But maybe not. But actually, Fareen, I was going to ask you, because talking about how employees can differentiate themselves from their colleagues, if they want to stand out in a positive way. But similarly, in this landscape where everybody's competing for skilled labor, how do employers differentiate themselves and make themselves appealing to prospective employees?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sean. And that's a question we get a lot from our clients at Gartner. The the way that we coach a lot of our clients is really to consider, what's their employment value proposition? Why should an employee come work for you, right? And a lot of times an employer can rattle those things off. Well, we offer this, this, this. We're an employer of choice because of this, this, and this. Well, how are you communicating that? How are you positioning that to your employees, right? How are you positioning that to your current employees and your prospective employees? And by the way, we haven't really, touched upon the Great Resignation as much, but retention is a large issue for organizations of all sizes at the time. And so if you're not very intentional as an employer about what your offering is, and you're not laser focused in on what's important in terms of employment attributes to your current employees, you're going to risk, additional retention issues. And retention bonuses and these types of things might help stem the tide in the short term, but really, the labor gap right now is so large between supply and demand that almost every employer that I talk to is feeling some sort of pinch. So it really is about formalizing your employment value proposition and what's important in terms of job attributes to your current and future employees, and how are you positioned against your competitors in that regard.
And is this something that you spend much time talking to organizations about, Farine? And
all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Yeah.
I can believe it. So, I mean, Rajiv, I just wondered if I could put a question to you, actually. So, we've been talking about the challenges that, we face with the hybrid work model, but I'd be interested to know, how do those challenges differ to, the remote working model that we were all sort of subject to, during the height of the pandemic? How do those differ?
Yeah, Sean, a great question. I think, that's the question we're grappling with now, right? As we're thinking about going back to the office. And the reality is, I think the 5 days in the office model, the traditional model, is probably not going to be there for the near term, or maybe forever, right? So it's really changing dramatically. So one of the things that we've noticed is, and I go back to even pre-pandemic days. So if you guys remember, right? So when we were in meetings, we'd have a bunch of people in the conference room, and there will be one or two people on call because they were working from home or whatever the need might have been. And it was always difficult. If you were the person on the phone, it was always so difficult to engage, right? Yeah. And if you were in the room, you had to make a deliberate attempt to say, hey, what do you think about this? So it was very difficult. Now, post-pandemic or during the pandemic, as we all got into a remote model, we're all using, WebEx and Teams and Zoom, and we're all, for the most part, either on camera or at least, it's visible, right? We're all in the same sort of platform. Again, it was easier because we were all in the same model, so the engagement was fine. I think in a hybrid model, the engagement becomes very tricky. First, just knowing that goes back to the same thing. Some of us will be in the office, some of us will not be in the office. So that engagement, even during meetings when we're trying to, address issues, it's going to be tricky. The other part, and John, you mentioned this, the traditional, water cooler way of addressing problems. Because if I had an issue and, I meet someone while at coffee, getting coffee, water, it's a lot easier, right? It's impromptu, boom, hey, by the way, can you take a look at this? Or, hey, by the way, what's going on? That goes away. And I think it's very hard to replicate that in that hybrid model where some are in the office, some are at home. And, and you guys have probably seen this, I get pings when I'm presenting something, I get pings from people and trying to figure out when to respond. It's very tricky, right? So I think that's another challenge. And I think, from a perspective as leader, one of the things we need to think about is how do we make sure, we're all, not just us as leaders, but also our teams are consciously thinking about, staying engaged, consciously thinking about, when they're pinging people, what's the right model to ping. One of the things that I've done, at least that's been successful for me, is I have virtual office hours. So instead of the water cooler, I have once a week, 30 minutes virtual office hour. And I say it very clearly, it's very optional. It's not mandatory. Nobody needs to come in, if they don't need to. But it allows people to drop in They always know I have a 30-minute on Thursdays. They can drop in anytime. So I think some of it, we just have to create some of these ways of sort of replicating some of the things we used to have, and to be effective in this hybrid model.
I'd be interested to know, actually. So, sorry, John. I'd be interested to know from you, John and Farine. Do you have anything similar in your workplaces to Rajiv's sort of drop in half an hour to maintain engagement levels with your teams?
Yeah, I would definitely say I have something similar, because in the hybrid environment where people are working, part-time at home and part-time at the office, I have one day of the week where it's mandatory for everybody to come into the office. Obviously, I give my managers, the liberty to tell their direct reports. Obviously, if they got a doctor's appointment, they can be a little flexible on that. But that's the one day on Wednesdays when everybody's in the office and we have that opportunity, whether it's for collaboration, training. That's the day where we're all engaged, we're all seeing each other. And let's face it, it gives me the opportunity to get FaceTime with everybody, because when it comes to my entire supply chain team, I joined Mesa in July, right in July of last year, in the middle of the pandemic. There are so many people on my team that I had never even met in person. I desperately just wanted to say hello, shake their hand, and get to know them a little bit personally, versus on a screen, just talking to them online.
Farine, do you have something similar, Gartner?
Yeah, I think, as organizations are kind of emerging from this fully remote environment and going back to hybrid, it is, I think, really important also to note that there are a lot of employees that have really thrived in the fully remote environment, because they're just better that way. Maybe they're introverts, or the water cooler talk scares them, or they don't have to navigate kind of the political aspects of being in an office. So I think looking at employees like that who actually are more comfortable being remote, and maybe you're getting a whole new level of productivity out of them. And maybe now, as organizations are reverting back to kind of an in-person or a hybrid, we should be very mindful of those employees that are not comfortable with that yet, or it's going to take them a little bit of time to readjust and to look for maybe some warning signals that maybe they're not doing as well. So I think both sides are really important. A lot of us, it seems like, here in the session, enjoy that personal kind of touch and that social aspect of it. But it is important to note that not all employees are going to feel that way, and we should really be, again, as empathetic leaders, really tuned in to how each of those employees are doing, and be there to support them.
Just out of interest, guys. Sorry, John. I was going to ask, how many days a week do you all work from home in your various companies?
So I can answer that, Sean. We have a flexible model, so we don't have a model that says you have to be in the office, like John, what you were saying, once a day or once a week, right? 1 day a week. So we've taken a very flexible stance on that, and partly because I think to the points that Farine, you were making earlier, making sure that we're being deliberate and conscious about our employees interests and desires, and frankly, some of it is also, if you think about it, like before the pandemic, we were not as worried about our health in the office, right? There are people who are really worried about that now, then just given their own personal, maybe they probably have own personal health issues that they're worried about. So I think we just have to be, to Farine's point, I think we just have to be conscious of that, and therefore I'm very thankful that at PanMA we have a pretty flexible model in terms of coming back to the office.
And Farine and John, what about you guys? You work in the office 1 day a week, is that right, John? You said.
Well, 1 day a week is the one day I want everybody to come together. Now, as a company policy, we're 2 days a week for everybody, but those days are pretty flexible. For my team, I've mandated Wednesday. Me personally, if I'm not traveling, I'm in the office 3 days a week, typically Monday through Wednesday. And then at home Thursday and Friday. I would like to broach one point that's a little bit of a different approach, because I think one thing that makes Mesa unique is that as an airline, we've got a sizable work population that's office work. And then we also have a sizable population that will in no way ever will have an ability to work remotely. So for the I've always just tried to deliver the message as we started coming back to the office to those that might have been resistant for very valid reasons, health reasons, et cetera. I said, please keep in mind, though, we have a sizable population of our workforce that never had a remote option, that has come to work every day during the pandemic. Our mechanics, our flight attendants, our pilots, some of our schedulers and things of that nature, they simply just they don't have the option and will never have the option. So please understand that while we are asking you to come back in and, for some days of the week, it's not because we just want to get people back to the office for the sake of being back in the office. There's a work productivity, and there's also people that never had the option. So please be considerate of them as well.
Great point.
Just finally to you.
Yeah. To answer your question, Sean, in my role, I'm 100% remote. Although I wish I was hybrid, to be honest. I miss the in-person interaction, but I'm 100% remote in my role.
And will you go back to a hybrid model, or are you working towards that?
Yeah, Gartner actually, this is a role that was 100% remote even prior to the pandemic. So.
Oh, I see. Right. Well, that's interesting. And just one final question, guys. I'm just going to put this to the floor. But I'm wondering, if you have a particularly important strategy that you need to thrash out that could be mission critical, is that something that's appropriate to do in a remote setting, or would your preference be to have a meeting like that, or a series of meetings like that, always face to face?
I think, the natural, I'll just kick it off. I think the natural proclivity would be to say, well, I think, it makes sense to do it in person as much as possible. But I'll take a sort of a contrarian view to that. I do think the FaceTime in itself, like the way the traditional office FaceTime, is no longer like the paradigm, I think, or no longer the sort of the solution for everything. I think we've really shown that we can be as effective. Now, you got to be engaged, though, right? So I think the really challenge is how engaged can you be, or how engaged your team going to be when you're in a virtual setting, or a mixed setting, in a hybrid setting. I think if you can crack that, like with being able to keep the team engaged, I think either one works, at least from my perspective.
And does anyone else have a view on that?
I'll just add that I think that it kind of depends on the situation. I've had to deliver messages that, based on where some employees are physically located at, some of our stations as an airline, obviously we have areas all across the country. I've had to deliver that message remotely via an email. But when I send out the email, I keep the message very short and direct to the point, and emphasize my words carefully to emphasize how important the message is. And if time permits, to do a face-to-face interaction with the employees that are in my immediate area, by all means, I take advantage of that, and I do it.
Yeah,
that's great.
And maybe I'll just add by saying that connection is just as important today as it ever was before the pandemic. And a good leader, and a leader that's able to flex and be successful both in an in-person and a remote environment is ultimately going to be successful. And so it really depends on your question, really depends on the leader and the specific situation, and creating an environment, frankly, whether it's in person or remote, where you have that connection with your employees and with what the content is you're working on is most important. So sometimes virtual is going to be great, and sometimes in person is going to be great for different reasons, but we have to be aware enough to make the right decision in the right circumstance. But we have to be able to be successful in either, frankly.
It's true. I mean, I guess in some ways everything has changed and nothing has changed in some regards, hasn't it? Mm-hmm. Well, guys, thank you ever so much for your time. Farine, John, Rajiv, really appreciate it. It's very insightful, really interesting, especially because you're all from such different backgrounds and you work in different sectors as well. So thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm sure everybody, who's watching you here live at Supply Chain Show would like to thank you as well. So thanks very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sean. Thanks,
guys.
guys.
Thank you, Sean. Good seeing you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
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 Now, don't go away, because our next speaker is up shortly.